Okay, folks, so it's here, or very soon will be. Prehistoric Planet, Ice Age Edition. And I'm proud to say that I served as one of the expert advisors on this series. I put in quite a few hours of work on this, and I'm particularly excited to see it come together. The BBC has released a trailer, and I'm going to walk you through the cast of characters in it. And then we'll talk about some that weren't included in this particular trailer, but will be in the series. So, if you would like a quick breakdown from a real paleontologist who provided scientific input to the series, then keep watching. Hi, I'm Professor Steve Wroe. I'm a paleontologist who does real paleontologist stuff, like reconstructing fossils, naming new species, publishing dozens of scientific articles, and supervising PhD students. I've even been known to get my hands dirty in the field, and this means that on this channel, you're watching real paleontology from a real paleontologist. So without further ado, let's dive in. And we kick off with a woolly mammoth, Mammuthus primogenus, emerging through a snowstorm. What a great way to start. I don't think that any animal says ice age like the woolly mammoth, in part because of its extraordinary range, from Europe right through North Asia and into North America. Next up, we have Homotherium serum, a scimitar-toothed saber cat, and a member of a very successful genus that once ranged from Africa through to North America. I published an episode on this awesome cat late last year, if you'd like to take a deeper dive on that one. Okay, so here we have a giant ground sloth, Megalonyx jeffersoni. This is a North American species, and it was big, maybe up to 1,300 kilo or so, although it was certainly not the largest ground sloth ever. It was no genius and probably not the fastest to react, but it would have been no easy meal. Megalonyx means great claw, and it was called that for good reason. Its claws were massive and its arms were tremendously powerful. Next cab off the rank is a giant short-faced kangaroo, Procoptodon, probably Procoptodon gallia, the largest kangaroo that ever lived. Aside from being huge, short-faced kangaroos are weird in that they had a tendency to walk instead of hop, at least at low speeds. Another standout feature is its incredibly powerful jaws, as demonstrated by Dr. Rex Mitchell and myself in this 2019 publication. And here we catch a glimpse of Leptoptilus robustus, a giant stork from the little island of Flores, the same island, incidentally, on which our little hobbit relative was discovered, and the Komodo dragon still lives today. The giant stork may well have been flightless and likely filled a scavenging as well as predatory role. Next up, Dryptotherium texanum, basically a giant armadillo, and obviously no easy meal. Its fossils are known from Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and northern Mexico. And we're certainly talking about a big animal here, up to 500 kilograms, or maybe bigger still. Interestingly, compared with its South American giant relatives like Glyptodon, its bony osteoderms are thinner and less densely sculpted, suggesting that it might have been a bit more mobile than its other relatives. Then we flip from North America to Madagascar, because our next character is the giant fossa, Cryptoproctus speleer. This is obviously a close relative of the living fossa, Cryptoproctopherox. These beautiful and incredibly athletic lemur predators are actually more closely related to the mongoose clan than to cats. The term giant is relative here. It probably never exceeded around 20 kilograms in weight, but this is nearly twice as heavy as the living species. Okay, so next up we have what is clearly a giant terrestrial bird. Now, I must admit, I was not entirely sure on this one. There have been a range of now extinct giant terrestrial birds that lived through the ice ages, These include species of moa from New Zealand, elephant bird in Madagascar, and dromonithids in Australia. Now, I have published on moa with colleagues of mine investigating their feeding biomechanics in this 2016 paper here. We compared the mechanics of 6 species of moa. It was really neat because we got to work on CAT scans of an actual mummified head. Anyway, my best guess is that this is a species of Dinornis, the largest of these giant New Zealand birds. They only really went extinct a few hundred years ago. And if you really are interested in extinct New Zealand fauna, you might want to check this earlier episode of mine on the giant Haast's eagle, the largest eagle that ever lived, and the only predator that could take down a moa. Here we have some woolly rhinoceros, and of course, no Ice Age megafauna series could do without this iconic species. Funnily enough, its closest living relative is the rather diminutive Sumatran rhinoceros that weighs in at a paltry 750 kilograms or so on average. The woolly rhino had an extensive range right across northern Eurasia, although it evidently never made it into the Americas. In these scenes, they are being pursued by a pack of scimitar-toothed cats, not an enviable position. Next up, this time, I think we do have a Madagascan elephant bird, Aepyornis maximus. This is a very serious contender for the biggest bird to have lived. Either way, its eggs are definitely the largest eggs known for any species ever. Not even the largest known eggs from non-avian dinosaurs are as big. There were actually 4 species of elephant bird, but Maximus was the biggest. Like the moa of New Zealand, this most recent species disappeared within the last few hundred years or so, almost certainly as a consequence of human interference, one way or the other. And here we have another giant ground sloth, probably the elephant-sized Erematherium. It had a pretty impressive distribution from southern North America, Central America, and a large swathe of South America. This is one of those South American endemics that pushed up into North America during the Great American Biotic Interchange in the Pliocene. It may well be the largest of the giant ground sloths. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that this is not depicted as a shaggy, hairy beast, and it's presented in a tropical, jungle-like setting. We need to remember that even during the coldest Ice Age periods, what we call glacial maxima, there were still very significant tracts of land that remained relatively warm, especially in the southern hemisphere. This is not to say that there were no major climatic shifts down south, but they were not as extreme as in the north, which was characterized by massive glaciation events. Next up here, we have the South American Macrauchenia. It's a total evolutionary mashup. Had the body of a camel, the neck of a llama, and the limbs of a horse, but it was not related to any of them. It belonged to the Litocternia, a entirely separate South American lineage that evolved in isolation for over 60 million years. Charles Darwin described it as one of the most curious animals he'd ever encountered. Its nasal openings were positioned high on the skull, between the eyes rather than at the front of the snout, and this anatomical oddity strongly suggests that it had either a small trunk or inflatable nostrils, as shown here. Our next character is Steller sea cow, Hydrodomalus. It's a sirenian, and its closest relative is the dugong. As you can see, it had a very similar shape, but it was huge, up to 9 meters in length and perhaps over 10,000 kilograms in weight. This is another one of those species and stories that makes you want to tear your hair out in frustration. First discovered in 1741, within 27 years, we humans had wiped them out. I don't want to talk about it anymore, and really makes me want to cry. I'm sure there'll be plenty more interesting facts presented in the series. So now we have an hydriodon. How exciting! This is a species of truly gigantic otter from Africa. It's like the biggest otter ever, comparable to the living African lion in size. It's pretty new to science. The description was only published a few years ago in 2022 here. It seems that the giant otter was writing its own script. This was certainly a powerful beast, and a number of features suggest that it was more terrestrial than any otters living today. For example, it had longer limbs and its toe bones weren't as flattened. That said, it was still semi-aquatic. Interestingly, it is shown shaping up to an African species of Homotherium here. From Africa, we flip to the relatively tiny Indonesian of Flores, and a dwarf species of elephant, Stegodon florensis. And by dwarf, we're talking pony-sized, maybe 300 to 400 kilograms. Again, this is the island on which our little hobbit relatives were found. And we have archaeological evidence in the form of stone tools associated with one of these dwarf elephants' remains. At this point, it's not clear whether the hobbits actually preyed on these little elephants or whether this was just evidence of scavenging. Next up, we have another giant armadillo, a glyptodon. Pretty sure this is the Dicerus. These are obviously the mammalian equivalents of ankylosaurs. Pound for pound, they may have been even more heavily armoured. Just the shell of one of these animals may have weighed as much as 150 kilograms. All right, so now we have the giant deer, Megaloceros, the one with the biggest antlers ever. This is an animal I've had a particular interest in, and together with my then PhD student, Ada Klinkhammer, and some other colleagues, we published this paper a few years back. We were looking at the question of whether or not these humongous antlers were used in real combat, or whether they were just for show. Basically, Ada built three-dimensional computer models, and we digitally crash tested a Megaloceros and compared its performance with a range of living deer species. Long story short, we reckon that it certainly could have, but it would likely have been more restricted and kind of more ritualized combat than in living species. I uploaded an episode on the giant deer a few months back if you're interested. Next, we catch a very fleeting glimpse of what I am pretty sure is a juvenile giant rat kangaroo, Propleopus oscillans. I actually did my honours year on this curious subfamily of rather atypical kangaroos way back in the 1990s. Here's me with the beautifully preserved skull of one of the earliest species. These have been called carnivorous kangaroos, and it seems very likely that they included more meat in their diets than any living were. There was probably a wide range of diets among them, though, and I nonetheless consider it unlikely that any were truly carnivorous, and certainly none were what we would call hypercarnivores. I've published an episode on these intriguing critters previously too, if you'd like to take a look. Okay, so now we're talking marsupial lions, Thylacoleo carnifex. And if you're a regular to my little channel, you will know that this is my all-time favourite super predator. Comparable in size to a female lion, it was Australia's largest and most formidable mammalian predator, and arguably the most specialised hypercarnivore to have ever existed. Pound for pound, among big mammalian predators, it had the most powerful bite and the most specialised meat-sharing dentition ever. I've published a bunch of papers and book chapters over the last couple of decades that focus on this fascinating and often controversial beast. The most recent being this one back in 2023. And the marsupial lion was the subject of my first episode in this series, which I uploaded a little over a year ago. I could, of course, ramble on for hours, but if this animal piques your interest, then before you watch the BBC's awesome reconstruction and CGI presented in this upcoming series, you might want to get up to speed by watching this episode of my Super Predator series. Right, now, at the start, I know I said I was going to go through the entire cast of characters here. I reckon I'm about 2/3 of the way through, but I've simply run out of time and I've got to get some other stuff done. So I'm going to pause it here and run through the rest shortly in a second part. I hope you found this useful, and if you did, please like and subscribe. It would be much appreciated.